and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I am your host Deepak. We are delighted to welcome Professor Christopher Wong Michaelson and Professor Jennifer Tosti-Kharas in today's podcast episode. Both distinguished faculty members will share invaluable insights from their widely acclaimed book, Is Your Work Worth It? How to Think About Meaningful Work. Professor Christopher Wong Michaelson holds a Barbara and David A. Koch endowed chair in business ethics at the University of St. Thomas and also served as an adjunct professor at NYU Stern School of Business. Professor Christopher is a philosopher and business ethics expert with 25 years of experience advising leaders on meaningful work. He earned his PhD in philosophical ethics and aesthetics from the University of Minnesota and began his career at PricewaterhouseCoopers, later joining Wharton as a faculty member. He has served as a PwC's strategy officer to the World Economic Forum and contributed to 10 editions of its Global CEO Survey. Currently, he is Opus Distinguished Professor of Principal Leadership at the University of St. Thomas, a faculty member at NYU Stern, President of the Society for Business Ethics, and host of Work in Progress with Christopher Michaelson. Our second distinguished guest on today's podcast episode is Professor Jennifer Tosti-Kharas. Professor Jennifer is the Camilla Latino Spinelli Endowed Term Chair and Professor of Organizational Behavior at Babson College, where she teaches leadership, organizational behavior, and career development. She holds a PhD in management with a focus on organizational behavior from NYU Stern and a BS in economics from Wharton. Professor Jennifer's research, which explores meaningful work and career development, has been published in top journals such as Academy of Management Review, Administrative Science Quarterly, Journal of Business Ethics, Journal of Vocational Behavior, and Personal Psychology, and earned multiple awards. Professor Jennifer is on the editorial board of Journal of Organizational Behavior and was a guest editor for the Journal of Business Ethics special issue on ethics and the future of meaningful work. She is currently the program chair for Copenhagen 2025 for the Careers Division of the Academy of Management. She has also been treasurer and representative at large for the division. Before academia, Professor Jennifer was a strategy consultant at Accenture and enjoys skiing, yoga, and live music with her family. Professor Christopher and Professor Jennifer, we are truly honored and privileged to have both of you on the podcast. Looking forward to an engaging conversation.
We are honored to be with you, Deepak. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those wonderful introductions.
Professor Christopher, what inspired you both to write Is Your Work Worth It? And explore the complex relationship between work and meaning?
Well, Deepak, I think one honest answer to that question is that despite those long introductions that you gave us, we are just ordinary people who work hard, and we sometimes wonder why. And because we've wondered that, we've engaged in those questions in our research. I think two seminal tragedies of the 21st century really shaped our research and our book. The first was September 11th. That's when our research partnership began. After 9/11, work was heroic. It was a way of telling terrorists that they didn't win, that they couldn't stop us. But the second tragedy was the COVID-19 pandemic. And we had already started work on the book when the pandemic hit. And that changed our thinking about the meaning of work. In some sense, both tragedies highlighted the importance of essential work. But although after 9/11, a lot of people sought more meaningful work, during the pandemic, I think people started questioning the relationship to work at all. So essential workers, for example, had to decide whether to go into work that was a threatening workplace to their own health and well-being. Some unemployed workers, at least in the United States, temporarily did better with their unemployment benefits than they were doing in their work itself. And then non-essential workers who could work remotely started valuing the flexibility of their work. So both of these tragedies really led us to dig deeper into these questions of work and meaning.
Professor Jennifer, would you like to add?
I think that's a wonderful response from my co-author. And I guess the one thing I would add is that as people who did academic research as our primary outlet for our thoughts about what makes work meaningful and what we should prioritize in our lives with regards to our work, this was really an opportunity to bring, I mean, we were really excited about the opportunity to bring our message to a broader, wider audience and and just as we are real working people, to talk to real working people and help them frame big questions about why they work.
Professor Christopher, the book dwells into the concept of engagement at work. What do you think are the key reasons behind such low levels of engagement among workers today?
I'll ask Jen to answer that question first, and then maybe I'll have additional thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think that the statistic that engagement is at an all-time low needs to be interpreted alongside the corresponding statistic that worker satisfaction with their jobs is at an all-time high. So something very interesting is going on here. We're more satisfied and less engaged, or perhaps we are more satisfied with being less engaged. So this is an interesting statistic. Obviously, we cannot say direct causality, but I think one way to interpret this would be to say this is a natural course correction toward what has been explored as a trend, I mean, beginning around the turn of the 21st century, as this concept of the overworked American, that despite advances in technology that might have us doing far less for work, we are doing far more, and we're perhaps more consumed with our work than ever before. So depending on how you look at it, alongside trends like, quiet quitting and the, odiously named lazy girl jobs, we might reasonably ask, is this disengagement actually showing up in a visible way at work, in a way that's concerning for organizations, for customers, for fellow coworkers? Can we see this disengagement? And then we really need to think about, well, then what do we need to do to re-engage employees? But I think I wouldn't rule out the idea that statistic about satisfaction is telling part of the story. So the satisfaction should at least drive some level of, if not engagement, still maybe longevity in one's job, or contributions in, sufficient contributions, but maybe we were going above and beyond all the time, and that became the norm. And then a reasonable question to ask is that sustainable? And if not, then we might see this sort of natural course correction where people are less engaged, but no less satisfied.
Yeah,
Christopher,
Professor
anything
Christopher.
to add?
Yeah, I think it may be good news, it may be bad news, and I think it depends on the motivations behind the satisfaction and engagement statistics going in different directions, and it might be different for each of us. I just think the idea for somebody like me who feels very engaged in my work, that I might want simply to get my work out of the way as fast as possible so that I can engage in life, that is a little bit foreign to me because I feel engaged at work. And yet, if people are engaging more in other aspects of their life and connecting with the community around them when they are away from work, then it can be good news. But our workplaces are also communities. And so I think employers would like their employees to be more engaged with each other and with the work itself.
You both examine the question, when and how much should we work? In today's fast-paced, always-on world, what advice do you have for individuals seeking a balance between work and personal life?
Well, we used to be in jobs that were more fast-paced than academic jobs and required us to be always on all the time when we were management consultants. And I remember every time I got on an airplane to visit a client and I was leaving my wife and children, I always thought, is this worth it? And there was a sense in which, of course, I had to do this work. It was one of the things that was supporting my ability to have a family outside of work. But I think it's really important to choose work that you don't resent for taking you away from the people and things that you love most. And if you find yourself thinking every time you go on a trip or every time you go into the office that I'd rather be somewhere else, that is a signal that maybe it's not the right position for us. I think one piece of advice that I often give my students is that they shouldn't trade present happiness for future happiness. It's important to live in the moment, not because we shouldn't plan for our futures, we have to, financially and otherwise, but so many of the people whose work we have studied through our research died in these tragedies before they made it to the future. And so their families left behind were holding on to the time that they had with them, just reinforcing the importance of using that time wisely.
Professor Jennifer?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'll add is if you find yourself working kind of more than you want or more than seems necessary, I would step back to reevaluate, is this actually necessary to get the work done? Or has a sort of norm evolved? I mean, I think one of the more surprising findings of work from home during COVID was that everyone thought, oh, we're going to work way less. We don't have to commute. We're able to just focus on sort of the essential tasks. And instead, work kind of creeped into personal life in a way that we're always checking email, checking right before bed, checking first thing in the morning, and expecting responses in something like real time, because what else are we doing? And I think some of that is carried over even into the present, sort of post-COVID world. So is this necessary? Are there ways? I mean, I think setting reasonable boundaries in work, as we do in other parts of life, is just a healthy practice. And I think very few of the types of jobs where work from home was allowed are so urgent on a day-to-day basis that that's really necessary. So I would just do a, kind of a quick audit of that.
Professor Christopher, the book asks, should I work for love or money? How do you think this balance has shifted in recent years, particularly in light of the post-pandemic job market?
Jen, you go this one first.
Well, I was going to say, Christopher, should we talk about our op-ed, our recently published op-ed, since this is timely. So Christopher covered this, how the pandemic and 9/11 before us, these big crises, really bring to the forefront, maybe I've been working a little bit more for money, and maybe now the love is a little more central because I recognize, again, that my time on this earth might be short. And at the same time, I think post-pandemic, we have had a lot of people, we're kind of back to feeling maybe stuck in jobs, or can we move? Or, how's the economic forecast looking? And, in the US right now, we're in a very interesting moment where we have a new administration. We have a lot of things changing very quickly. And one of the things that President Trump has done is offered federal employees a incentive to retire, or the option to leave their jobs. And this is really putting this question of love or money front and central. And to that end, Christopher and I have it's like hot off the presses, posted a op-ed, an opinion piece in Time Magazine that is exploring this question that, to say, should I take this buyout, puts the question of money really front and central. And of course, we could do a very economically rational, calculation of the money I'm making, the time it might take me to get a new job, what it means for my career. These are all very sort of economically rational questions, but not all, but most, we would say, federal employees are not necessarily working primarily for the money. They see their work as having a broader purpose and a deeper meaning. And so to put these kinds of questions first and foremost trivializes that and maybe even does not recognize the long tenure that and service to the country and loyalty and patriotism that such work requires. So it's for lots of reasons, that's a perpetually interesting question.
Very insightful. In a world where many workers are reassessing their careers, what do you think are the most critical factors that determine whether the job feels meaningful?
That's a great and mysterious question that philosophers have been contemplating for thousands of years. And I don't think we have a firm answer to it because, in one sense, meaning is in the eye of the beholder. But I do think that from a philosophical perspective, there are some things that might make some kinds of work objectively more meaningful than other kinds of work. So, for example, most of us want a sense of fulfillment from our work. And that is both just a feeling that we get from doing work that feels good to do, that we enjoy doing, but also that sense of fulfillment usually comes from a sense of making a contribution to society. We might not have a clear idea of what that contribution is, but in some sense, we have a basic human need to feel useful, to be of use. And to be of use means being of use to people other than ourselves. And that gives us a sense of accomplishment. It improves our relationship with our coworkers and the beneficiaries of our work. So I think all those things are factors that work together that make work feel meaningful.
Professor Jennifer, what role do cultural artifacts like film and literature play in shaping our perceptions of work and meaning, as discussed in your book? Can you share an example that resonates deeply with you?
Yes, and I love, Deepak, that you called them cultural artifacts because that's exactly what they are. So I teach a class right now. I'm teaching a class with a film scholar at Babson that's called the Nature, Culture, and Future of Work. And we have students watch a film about work every week, paired with readings from our book and readings from other books about work. And to consider not just, what do I want from my work, but why do I want what I want? Where do my notions of success, failure, ambition come from? Where do my ideas about what makes a good job come from? And sometimes that means money, and sometimes that means meaning. And so I will share the example, and then I will share the example from this week's film, and then I'm going to invite, because the joke that Christopher and I always make is I'm the low culture person and he's the high culture person. So I'll talk about a film, and then maybe he'll want to talk about a work of literature because that's what he brings to this discussion. So our film from this week was 2009's Up in the Air, starring George Clooney. And I'm curious, Deepak, have you seen this film, or do you know this film?
Yes, I have seen.
Okay. So this is a film about George Clooney is a consultant. He travels, and he has a great quote about he's on the road, 300 days of the year, which means he has to spend a miserable 65 days at home, or, something like that. He travels to lay people off. So we see a lot of shots of him delivering the bad news on behalf of, so he's a hired gun to lay people off for a living. And the film itself there's a love story arc, there's a rivalry between George Clooney's character and a young upstart played by Anna Kendrick. There's a family drama that plays out, but this is more than anything else a cultural indicator of work values. And it plays like a satire, but it has a real emotional punch and really ends up less like a comedy than a tragedy. But it sheds light on many of the themes that we've discussed here. what does it mean to have work be so central to who we are that George Clooney is such an extreme character of such an extreme example, his character of working. His work is his life. He says to know me is to fly with me, because he's on the road so much. He's aiming toward 10 million frequent flyer points. And I won't spoil whether he gets them or not, but that's his life goal. And so his apartment, he lives in Omaha, which is where his company is based, but his apartment is so minimal, it looks like a hotel room. So it really asks this question of what would our lives look like if our lives really were our work at an extreme, and in doing so sheds light on the many ways in which work, even in normal times, even when we're not at such an extreme, can really detract from our lives, our relationships with family, with significant others, with coworkers. So I highly recommend this film. It's aged like remarkably well. And I have to say my students, who are all, Gen Z, typical college age students, really enjoyed it as well. All right, Christopher, I'm guessing he's going to take us back even further.
So even though Jen teases me for being a literature snob, I will say I really like the film Up in the Air. And I used to travel so much as a management consultant that I'm approaching million miler status with Delta Airlines. So I can relate a little bit to that life. But yes, I do have a work of literature that I want to talk about by Leo Tolstoy. It's not as well known as his long novels that are masterpieces, War and Peace and Anna Karenina, but it's called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and I think it might be the best thing, the most perfect thing that he wrote. And it's about a lawyer who becomes a judge who is constantly climbing in his career and doesn't really know what for, except that he just wants to get a promotion, have more money, appear more wealthy. And Tolstoy says that his life had been most simple and most ordinary, and therefore most terrible. That's an indictment of all of us who just go through the motions of our work and lives just to impress other people and just to get ahead. So when Ivan Ilyich gets a promotion that put him 2 levels above his former colleagues, the narrator says he was, quote, completely happy. Well, we know that's not true happiness just to get promoted above our colleagues, but for him to be completely happy means that he's missing something in life. He decorates his house, the narrator says, in a way that was just what is usually seen in the houses of people of moderate means who want to appear rich. So when I teach this story to my MBA students, they stop on that line and they think, am I like that? I know people who are like that. And it really makes them think, what are we doing this for? What are we living for? So obviously, the title of the book, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, spoils the end. He dies, yes. But I won't spoil the rest, but I will say that this book is an incredible way of thinking about and evaluating not just what we do, but why we do it, who we do it for, all these questions of meaning and purpose.
You touch on the idea of trade-offs in pursuing meaningful work. How can individuals navigate this trade-off without feeling like they are compromising their values?
Yeah, well, somebody like Ivan Ilyich, he didn't know what his values were, so he didn't have to worry about that. I'm happy to say that I think my students are wonderful, and they really, when we're together, openly wrestle with these issues, and they acknowledge these trade-offs. So my specialty is ethics, and so that's just one of many possible trade-offs that we can feel between work and life. But sometimes our work organizations, our bosses directly ask us to do things that violate our ethical values. And it's easy to say, well, we should not violate those values, but it's harder to do because sometimes they are serious violations that put us at legal risk, for example, lying about whether we had customer approval to make a trade, for example, overbilling a client. But sometimes they are less obvious, more subtle, or everybody does it. So in our former world of management consulting, there was a common practice of being asked by managers to eat one's hours. That means to under-report one's hours in order to make the financials of the project look better, like we did it more efficiently and less expensively than we said we might. And those are the kinds of trade-offs that are ethical in nature. And I think David Brooks has a beautiful contrast that he talks about in his book, The Road to Character. He distinguishes between our resume virtues and our eulogy virtues. And he says, our resume virtues are the things that we spend so much of our working lives focusing on at the expense of the things that we all know in the end really matter, the things that we want said about us at our eulogies. And I think that's a really important way of thinking about the trade-offs that we make, moral or otherwise, throughout our careers. And we have to have those eulogy virtues in sight in order to stay true to what really matters.
Professor Jennifer, in your research, you examine how work impacts both personal lives and society. What do you believe is the broader societal responsibility of work beyond the individual?
So this is such a timely question because we hotly debated this in my class, actually, just this week, in part talking about up in the air and our readings. Among them was a great article from The Economist called Why Do We Work So Hard? But so my students made this very compelling, impassioned claim that they think their primary responsibility is to themselves and their own wellness. And they use this, analogy of the oxygen mask. If I don't have my own oxygen mask on, how can I possibly make a difference in the world? And so they really prioritize their own, they were talking about things like health and well-being and personal satisfaction. And the psychological term here would be, satisfaction of needs around self-actualization. So they see self-actualization, which was in Maslow's pyramid, the highest. To them, that's their basic. Unless they're there, they can't possibly expect to contribute beyond society. And I think partly that might be of course, we always want to say a generational thing, or, kids today, or they haven't gotten out in the working world. But this is also where Christopher and we don't have a hot debate, but we do have differences in disciplinary perspectives, because as a psychologist, I will often say, the meaning of the work does come from what the individual believes they are contributing, and kind of some version of what my students are saying, my own self-actualization and feelings that work is meeting my own personal needs for personal growth, learning development, et cetera, really matters. And then a philosopher's perspective would be, as I've come to know through Christopher, that still we can make objective decisions about what work is more meaningful and certainly more valuable to society, and that work that's more valuable does more than just satisfy the individual. It actually gives something back or is working in some ways to benefit society. I think what I'll say there, though, is sometimes that can look like benefiting certain others. We can do this very complicated accounting about, almost a utilitarian, what is the most number of people I can help through my work? And must I do that through, we can imagine someone saying, well, then government is the way to do it because you're making decisions that impact the greatest number of people. You could say direct care is the most efficient way to do it because I'm really I'm maybe serving a fewer number of people, but I'm, doing direct care. Some of us might work in what seem like office jobs, but for companies that have this really noble social mission. And so we can lose sight of it, but actually we know our company is a force for good and a force for change in the world. So certainly we believe, the perspective of the book is that we work should be in service to making the world a better place. Ideally, it will be. Again, one of the trade-offs we may make at any given point in our career, and but I certainly want people to think, what is the value of work to myself? What is the value of work to others that I care about? That can be my family, people close relations to me. And then what is my work contributing to society at large?
Professor Christopher, you ask, what kind of mark will my work leave on the world? How can we start thinking about the legacy we want our work to leave? And how can this shift our approach to work today?
Deepak, are you a fan of David Bowie?
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard not to be. I mean, so he left a great mark on the world, but when he was asked that question once, he joked that he wanted his legacy to be that he was known for having had great haircuts. We open the book with a story about David Bowie, and I think that's that quip that he made about great haircuts is so funny because there was probably a time in his life when he was younger when he would have been serious about that he wanted to have been known for that. And of course, he had many different hairstyles, some of which aged well and some of which didn't age so well. But what he probably didn't realize at that point in his life is that a lot of his fans have become people who thought that they were once misfits, and he made them feel like they belonged in this world because he was also kind of a misfit, and his haircuts were evidence of being a misfit. So he made these outsiders feel like they mattered, and that's part of his legacy, in addition to just having been a great rock musician. So I think although there's been sort of a backlash against this always on hustle culture these days, there's a sense in which our book is optimistic about the possibility of work to be part of our legacy. And I think if we think of work as an expression of our values, our skills, the gifts that we can bring to the world in a public way, then work doesn't seem like such a bad thing after all. Most of us will think that our most important legacy is what we do through our private lives, our families, and so on. But that doesn't mean that we can't make this public impact through our work as well.
Professor Christopher, my question again for you. What would make life worth living in a world without work? And what alternative sources of fulfillment can we look to if our careers are no longer central to our sense of purpose? And Professor Jennifer, I would also like to hear from you as well later on.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
Well, this is a question that we do ask because there are lots of technologists who predict that a future without work is not that far away. I will note that they've been predicting that for at least 100 years, and work still seems to be with us. So my answer to that question is twofold. Number one, I think that our lives are worth living because we are creative beings, and work is one source of the creation that we make. And so if we didn't have work to create, we would still create. We would maybe create different things. Maybe they would be more literally creative things. Arts, for example. But I think also technology will never be able to replace our ability to care. And human to human care is a form of work that we would still engage in, even in a world without work.
Yeah, I'll chime in to say, I think this question, again, speaking about our cultural notions of what work means, this question is really existentially threatening to us because we truly it's hard to imagine a world without work. And it's hard to imagine we are so used to our days and lives and choices being essentially made for us via work. Again, to go back to Up in the Air, the protagonists life was very constrained. He had to make very few choices because he spent so much time at work. But it's been observed that our leisure has value because it is not work, not that it is, we've gotten to this point where it's not that we see it as sort of intrinsically valuable unto itself, but a break from work. And so I think it would take a cultural shift to get us to the place where we embrace leisure, maybe in and of itself. But I think that's kind of an exciting challenge that maybe work probably won't go away, but that maybe working a bit less or thinking about what is truly needed from me in my work, and then to what extent can I engage in leisure, is an exciting opportunity. I mean, the other thing that's been noted is how we tend to turn then our leisure almost into work. So we're used to this idea of working out, right? We use this term. And I was giving a talk about this at Babson recently, and someone in the audience said, I've really gotten into hiking in my spare time. This is my hobby. I love to hike, but I've noticed a lot of these hikers, not all, but a lot of these hikers it's like a job to them. They're metrics obsessed. They want to, the term is bag all these peaks. And there's this count of how many peaks in the Northeast are above a certain height. And they all know the number and how many have you gotten. And it's this like competition, and it's very work-like. And someone else in the audience, you can't make it up, is like, that's me. I'm a peak bagger. I have all but two, and it's like this pride and bragging. And, so will we make then our leisure resemble some of what we are used to from work, constraining the schedule, goal-oriented, driven by metrics? It's a funny thing to contemplate, because it only goes to reinforce how much work can define our lives and therefore define our leisure.
In India, I heard and I read many times from people that AI will take away our jobs and we have no choice to compromise with our passion. So given the economic and IT challenges many workers face, especially white collars and blue collars, how can they find fulfillment and purpose in their jobs, even if those jobs don't necessarily align with their passions?
Yeah, I think when we were just talking about a world without work, we were looking many years ahead. And maybe we were assuming that our governments would figure out how to financially sustain us in a world without work. So as you know, there have been many experiments with providing a universal basic income, for example, to replace the compensation that we get from work. But if that future ever comes, there's going to be a lot of messiness on the way to that future. And I think you just described this threat in the immediate future of jobs lost to AI and to robotic technology and so on. So that is indeed real. And I think there's a sense in which it could be seen as a privilege to even be thinking about meaning in work if we just need money from work. I would like to say that for probably most of the world's population who really need money from work, it's not that they shouldn't be thinking about meaning. I think that they have as much of a right to anybody else to think about meaning. We might not be able to act on our ideals, but I think that ultimately there's a way to think about what we get from work over the course of our careers. There's a popular framework called Ikigai that is based on a Japanese word for sort of reason for being. And it suggests that our reason for being is at the intersection of what we love to do, what the world needs, what we can be paid for, and what we are good at. And I think finding one position, especially when we need it badly right now, that answers all of those needs, is really a very tall order, next to impossible. So I would suggest thinking about how can we find all of those things over the course of our working lives, even if we can't find all of them at once.
Professor Jennifer, we would like to hear from your side, your perspective, from organizational point of view.
Yeah, so there is a concept in organizational behavior called job crafting, and I'd like to bring that up here. And that's all about how do I essentially take the job I have and turn it into the job that would be maybe not the job I want in a perfect world, but get me a little closer to what makes work meaningful or a passion. And that's through two pathways. Either changing the tasks, so what am I doing to do more of what is meaningful to me and less of what is not. And again, assuming that you have some discretion and ability to control what you're doing, and maybe long-term kind of jockeying for a conversation with maybe a boss about how can I shift my role, but, kind of getting in some time, like if you know that there's a task that really depletes you or you find really meaningless, what's the task reward at the end, to sort of compensate for that. The second pathway is through whom you are interacting with to do your work. Are there people with whom you get more of a sense of purpose, or maybe they are validating, why the work is meaningful. Maybe they feel the work is meaningful themselves. And so this is sort of this model of job crafting, which is a kind of a short term, you're changing what you do and who you do it with. But again, I would really kind of promote a longer term conversation with a boss. I mean, the thing that sometimes I tell when I'm talking to organizational leaders, you never want to think about your employees, especially your good ones, having to leave and get another job because they didn't see a path forward within the organization. And often one exists, they just felt they couldn't talk about it, right? Or to do so would be sort of a betrayal of their current work or current boss or current coworker. So just having the openness to seeing work as a place for someone's whole career development, and not just I'm sort of doing this job right now, only this job, and that's the only way forward in an organization. I think that leadership shift too is a way to retain employees, especially your top talent.
Professor, my last question. After exploring these deep questions, what do you both hope readers take away from your book? And what changes do you hope to see in a way people approach their careers moving forward?
Jen, do you want to go first on this?
Great question. Sure. So we wrote the book so that people would not need a crisis like 9/11 or the COVID pandemic to ask the big questions about work. We get so involved in the day-to-day of our work, our lives. It just can be difficult, absence a personal tragedy or global crisis, to really take stock of work and life. And we just hope that the book will get people to do just that. And we don't put forward, in a very philosophical way that's sometimes uncomfortable for an organizational psychologist. We do not provide answers. This is how to find, exactly make your work be a calling, or this is exactly how to make the most money or something like that. We really want people to ask thoughtful questions. And I think one of the most fundamental questions that you can ask is, why am I in this job? What am I hoping to get from it? That could be money. That could be career advancement. That could be deep personal meaning. It could be the sense that I'm giving back to society. It could be the camaraderie I feel with my coworkers, and I just, I love it, and it's my sort of a social circle. And then to check in, like, am I actually getting, so if I'm in it primarily for money, am I being paid, am I being compensated fairly? Do I have a path to make the money I would want to get? Am I making enough to live on? Things like that. If I'm in it primarily for the meaningfulness, am I seeing that? Am I seeing the direct beneficiaries of my work? Am I seeing clearly the way my work makes a difference? Is my work recognized and appreciated? Asking the question and then getting some data about, and am I actually getting that? And if not, again, we didn't write this book to make everyone quit their jobs or change careers or anything like that, but just to be very thoughtful and intentional. The hope is the book will validate. If you're seeking guidance, it'll give you guidance. But if you're not seeking guidance, it might help validate why you are where you are in a way that you just never thought of it that way before.
Professor Christopher?
So we are both academics, obviously, and we spend our academic lives thinking about and writing about theory. And I think one of my unexpected favorite parts about researching and writing this book was thinking about, listening to, and then writing about the stories of real people. We interviewed a lot of people for this book, and we told many of their stories in the book. And I think the best way to think about the questions that Jen was just posing is to think about how other people answer them too. Obviously, ask them of yourself, but learn about why other people work. What do they get from their work? And those are questions that might be uncomfortable to ask somebody, but you can learn about those stories when you read this book. So 3 that come to mind immediately. One is the story of Chad, who was raised in a closed religious community, and when he left that community, he had to find a way as a young man to support himself and to support his daughter. And so he began by rounding up grocery carts in the Costco parking lot. And he has since risen to high executive positions with that company. We talked with a woman named Kathleen who had always wanted to be a partner in a professional services firm. She didn't want to be a lawyer like her father, so she went into accounting. And she was so successful so early in her career, but was under so much pressure that she contemplated taking her own life, and fortunately found a way to reconcile her purpose in life with her purpose in work. And then one more person that we talked to is Maurice Siku, who came to the United States for school on a scholarship after he had been a young man growing up in relative poverty in Ghana. And he, when he was a college student, worked multiple jobs, including serving food to the very students who worked for him in a biology lab. So he knew hard work, and he knew what it was to be in servitude to others, but he longed to be successful, and he became a neurosurgeon, which to many people would be the pinnacle of success, but he really sees that work as being in service to the work that he really cares about, which is bringing affordable and accessible healthcare to his home continent of Africa. And so he's the CEO of a company that does that while he works as a neurosurgeon. So those are just 3 of the many amazing stories of people that we spoke to for the book. And I hope that people are inspired by them.
Listeners, it has been a true pleasure to have Professor Christopher Wong Michaelson and Professor Jennifer Tosti-Kharas on today's podcast episode. Both distinguished faculty members have shared invaluable insights from their widely acclaimed book, Is Your Work Worth It? How to Think About Meaningful Work, offering thought-provoking perspectives on the critical questions we must ask ourselves about the work we do and its impact on our lives and society. We are grateful to have had the opportunity to learn from both of them today. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the ongoing conversation about what truly makes work meaningful. Thank you, Professor Christensen and Professor Jennifer.
Deepak, thank you so much for talking with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.